good morning, good evening, good night, wherever and whenever you are. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Understood Properly with Brian Thornton, and today we are going to talk about the First Amendment. The NFL, they released a new standing something policy for the national anthem, and while this isn't my normal area that I like to comment on, it is an important part of American culture. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for this week's episode. I am going to be putting out episodes weekly, and I know I've said that before, but it will be continuing. There will be video for this episode because why not? I'm working on a new set at the moment, so this is kind of a piecemeal thing that I just sort of threw together right now. You can subscribe on YouTube at the Subversive Liberty channel so far, and yeah. So I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about this week, and I went through a few different things. There was the monk debate that happened in Canada between Michael Eric Dyson, what was her name? Goldstein. I believe she is a New York Times reporter, Jordan Peterson, and Stephen Fry. I still think I will do that one, but I want to make sure that I can get clips and actually show the context of that, especially if you haven't watched the debate, so that'll take a little bit more time. I was also going to do some sort of breakdown video of socialism and something that AJ Plus put out. And if I'm being honest, that doesn't really interest me. Those sorts of videos are rife with half-made arguments, and they rely mostly on graphics and clever little witticisms to make their point instead of reason or something to that extent. So instead, I decided to settle on another topic that is not something I usually like to talk about. Like I said before, I am admittedly not the biggest sports fanatic in the world. I do like hockey. I do like baseball. I do watch football every now and again, but it's really not something I spend my time doing. I know almost nothing about the players that are involved in, I don't know, anything, and the teams, even the teams that I watch. I'm not somebody that follows ESPN, Deadspin, so take it for what it's worth that I'm not coming at this as somebody who particularly enjoys the NFL or particularly cares whether the NFL or other sports organizations continue to exist. That being said, I'm going to go through the article first. I am using NFL.com. I figured that would give us the simplest format and the perhaps the least amount of bias within an article, and at the very least it was the easiest thing for me to find. So Roger Goodell, who apparently not a lot of people like, I don't know, I've heard that, my family says that he's a bad commissioner of the NFL. There were 6 changes that were the NFL will, I'll just read the article. The NFL will enact a national anthem policy for 2018 that requires players and league personnel on the sideline to stand, but gives them the option to remain in the locker room if they don't want to stand. The Roger Goodell announced Wednesday. Under the change approved by team owners at the Spring League meeting, individual clubs will have the power to set their own policies to ensure the anthem is being respected during any on-field action. If a player chooses to protest on the sideline, the NFL will fine the team. The player could also be fined by his team. This is insiders reported. These were unanimously approved, although not approved by the San Francisco 49ers owner, who said he abstained, in part due to the lack of player involvement in the decision process. I'm going to read this quote, and then we'll kind of get into a little bit of analysis. The policy adopted today was approved in concert with the NFL's ongoing commitment to local communities and our country, one that is extraordinary in its scope, resources, and alignment with our players. Goodell said in a statement, We are dedicated to continuing our collaboration with players to advance the goals of justice and fairness in all corners of our society. It was unfortunate that on-field protests created a false perception among many that thousands of NFL players were unpatriotic. This is not and was never the case. Eagles safety Malcolm Jenkins, one of the leaders of the player coalition, expressed his displeasure with the policy Wednesday. What NFL owners did today was thwart the players' unconstitutional rights to express themselves and to use our platform to draw attention to social injustices like racial inequality in our country. Everyone loses when voices get stifled, Jenkins said in a statement. While I disagree with this decision, I will not let it silence me or stop me from fighting. The national conversation around race in America that NFL players forced over the past 2 years will persist as we continue to use our voices, our time, and our money to create a more fair and just criminal justice system, end police brutality, and foster better educational and economic opportunities for communities of color and those struggling in this country. For me, this has never been about taking a knee, raising a fist, or anyone's patriotism, but doing what we can to affect real change for people. Hashtag the fight continues. So this must have been from Twitter or Facebook. Yeah, so that gives you I would say the long and the short of it. The NFL changed their policy. It used to be required, I believe, to stand out on the field, and before that, it wasn't really a big deal. Now, before I get into the minutia of this debate, because there's a few different things that I think people should try and understand, hence the title of the show. Before you cast judgment one way or the other. And this would go from people who are quote unquote on the player's side or quote unquote on the side of America, whatever the heck that means. Now, this is it specifically. So if you did not catch this was a couple of years ago, 2015. So 3 years ago now, this story came out, and apparently I didn't actually know about this originally. This was a joint report released by John McCain and Jeff Flake, that details how, I knew about it, I just didn't know that they were the ones in charge of it. I guess I should say. That John McCain and Jeff Flake details how the military spent millions of tax dollars to put on halftime shows, honor guards, jet flyovers, and other spectacles at professional and college sporting events. So this is, if you've grown up in the United States and you've watched sports, as a lot of people do, especially football games, as we know a lot of people like to watch American football on Sundays. This has been a common theme that, frankly, I can't remember a time where it didn't happen. I believe it wasn't as big of a spectacle, let's say, before we invaded Iraq, but I could be wrong on that. And it was it was always common. You would have the honor guard. You have a bunch of military people or a bunch of people holding a flag. You would have planes flying over. You would have all sorts of things, all sorts of spectacles, halftime shows, pregame shows that were allegedly around to invoke patriotism, I suppose. I'll read from this article that I'm posting is from Reason. And by the way, if you want, head over to subversiveliberty.org, find this episode, and you can see all the articles that I'm referencing in here on that page, if you want to do any checking of your own on some of the claims that I'll be making. In 2013, a roaring crowd cheered as Atlanta Falcons welcomed National Guard members who unfurled an American flag across the Georgia Dome's surface. Little did these fans or millions of other Americans know that the National Guard had actually paid the Atlanta Falcons for this display of patriotism as part of a $315,000 marketing contract. This unfortunate story is not limited to professional football, but is repeated at other professional and college sporting events around the nation. In fact, these displays of paid patriotism are included within the $6.8 million that the Department of Defense has spent on sports marketing contracts since fiscal year 2012. Here's the point of this, right? I don't necessarily have a problem with grand displays of patriotism. But what I think is very obvious here is that these were not natural market functions. Let's say this was not the natural coming together of voluntary bodies. This was, in fact, something that the Department of Defense tried to do as a part of a PR campaign to make sure that people associated patriotism with the military, and more importantly, football with patriotism, and therefore the military, which by extension would mean that you must support our actions of our military government. And that's really kind of the heart of this issue, and possibly why I think maybe the initial idea of protesting the national anthem missed the mark, at least in a lot of people's minds. And by that I don't mean that the specific things that I mentioned before, from Michael Malcolm Jenkins. I'm sorry, of what he said there, because I actually do agree with everything in his statement. Frankly, I do believe that the players in the NFL are using their platform, are using their voice to call attention to injustices that they see and, in fact, do exist in our current society. Where I disagree with them, possibly, maybe, I don't know, would be in the means by which we could rectify those situations, right? There's the difference. There's the distinction. And I think if you are somebody who is going to get all hot and bothered Because that's really what you're doing. You're just getting hot and bothered, and you're just loving the fact that you get to hate somebody. You get to talk about how, oh, these people are ungrateful, these guys on the TV, and they make millions of dollars, and what, they can't stand for the flag? That flag represents our freedom. That flag represents justice and truth and everything. It's like, okay, maybe it does. Look, I mean, you can see if you're watching the video, I have the American flag up in my room. I am not somebody that is afraid of flying the American flag. I'm not somebody that, thinks it's great to burn it, but I do respect and, in fact, would defend people's right to do so. There's a problem. There's a problem when we allow symbolism to overtake us, and specifically overtake our capacity to reason. Symbols are very effective. They are very useful in certain respects, right? Like I have a symbol for the Subversive Liberty website. There are symbols that are associated with different groups, right? The entire idea, Jerry Seinfeld, right, has a great bit on this in his new special where we're just rooting for colors. We're rooting for like the uniforms on players. But there's an incredible amount of symbolism that goes into sports. And in fact, we could argue maybe that sports are symbolic for competition and battle, as in fact they were used historically to help train warriors to fight wars. But the problem, but you can't let symbols go too far, right? You shouldn't necessarily let, just because somebody disagrees with what a symbol means, just because somebody maybe defaces a symbol, you shouldn't be up in arms about it. Maybe you can, maybe it's worthwhile, maybe it's helpful, but the argument that says you can't kneel for the national anthem because because people have died for that flag goes entirely counter to the entire ethos of what the American idea is supposed to be. And why would you say that? Well, because we have this little thing called the Constitution, and within the Constitution we have these amendments. And I don't know why I didn't pull this up beforehand, but I'm going to go ahead and just pull it up so I can read the First Amendment of the United States. Just word for word. I mean, obviously, I know the broad strokes. So the First Amendment of the United States, because this is really what people are reacting to, and in fact was said in the comments from Malcolm Jenkins, saying that this is violating our First Amendment rights. And here we're going to get into a little bit of the trickiness of the situation. But the First Amendment of the Constitution clearly states that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. This idea is, I believe, necessary to the cornerstone of American society, and I would argue any free society that should exist on the earth. This idea that we should be able to speak our minds and not be afraid of the government. The government, it's important to remember, coming after us is, well, if you're not on the side of that, then I don't know that we're on the same side, but I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. So if you are somebody who maybe would disagree that the First Amendment was a good idea, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out at brian@subversiveliberty.org, Brian Thornton Jr. on all social media. If you want to follow me, go ahead. And I'd love to talk to somebody who maybe doesn't think this. But I think most people would agree that the First Amendment's a pretty good idea. It's a pretty great thing that this was enshrined, but the important thing here, and this is where we're going to start to get into some of the problems, is that it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise or the abridging of speech or the freedom of the press, so on and so forth. Not the NFL. And here's where I think a lot of people are making the wrong kinds of arguments, because they will say, oh, well, America is supposed to be about, America wants freedom of speech, but America is silencing NFL protests. It's like, okay, well, now here's your problem. You're anthropomorphizing America. You're making America into a body. America is a collection of individuals, right? I think individualism is a much better way of understanding the world. I don't think that we should immediately group people into collective bodies based off arbitrary characteristics or even chosen ideas, right? Just because that I have ideas that are similar to other people doesn't mean that you should lump me in with them. It might be the case that I agree with them. It might be the case I'm not. I think you should try in all things in your life to treat people as individuals as much as possible. And that's not always possible. Admittedly so. That's not always possible. But what is possible, I'm going to pop down a little bit so I'm in the shot better. What is possible, though, is that in private institutions can, and in fact are within their rights to set policy. So here's where it gets tricky, right? Just because there's a First Amendment does not mean that the NFL is not within their rights to disallow this so-called this protesting of the national anthem. And actually, I don't think I've addressed this, so I'm going to go ahead and I've addressed it in writing, but not in speech. So I'm going to go ahead and address this right here. I am not sure why kneeling, why genuflecting, why taking one knee or two knees is showing any less respect for the flag than standing. In fact, if we go back throughout history, if we look at examples of religion, if we look at examples of venerance, if we look at examples of when you are trying to show that you are revering something. And in fact, this is going to get into a little bit of my critique with the way that we revere. We consider the flag sacrosanct. We consider it holy, in a sense. And I think this is a very real problem in the modern American consciousness. Standing is one way to show reverence, but kneeling has always been regarded actually as a greater show of reverence. And this is something that I don't think squares the circle very well if you want to reason through this properly. Again, you can get mad. It's very easy for sports people to get mad. Have you ever listened to sports radio? It's a lot of people yelling about stuff that doesn't really matter and in fact doesn't really have a lot of consequence except for what might happen next Sunday. Sports are fun to watch. I'm not going to deny that. I don't have any problem, by the way, with how much athletes in the NFL and so on and so forth make. It's a natural market function. People enjoy spectator sports are incredibly popular. And I don't think there's anything that's going to change that anytime soon. In fact, I think it would just change. The sports would change, right? You know, baseball used to be the big one. Now everyone's talking about football. Now football's going down. So who knows? Maybe hockey's next. That would be cool. I like hockey. So the NFL can't. The NFL is entirely within their rights to do this. Whether it's the right call is the question that you have to answer, right? And here's where you have to be careful. You shouldn't be conflating the U.S. system with football. Although, as I've already shown, the government has done a very good job. The Department of Defense and others have done a very good job of paying millions of dollars so that the average American does conflate football with the American society or with the American government. And in fact, but that doesn't mean that the NFL doesn't have the right to do this. What they're doing. It bears in mind, and I think here's where I want to look back and remind you about an article I wrote last September about being aware of political footballs. And we have a lot of issues in our society, and I would think a lot of that comes from the fact that we talk about things in political terms all the time. And in fact, it is within the interests of politicians to not care about issues, or not to care about issues, excuse me. It's within the interest of politicians to, rather than solving issues, keeping them around, because that enables them to continue to get funding, elected, so on and so forth. Because if you win the game, right, in the political sense, if you get a piece of legislation passed, if you actually fix something that's going wrong, what else do you have to do, right? Is there something else? Perhaps there probably is. But I think a lot of times what politicians like to do is let these things continue on. So I'm going to read from just this initial part, because I think, and here I'm talking specifically towards people who have railed against the fact that Kaepernick took a knee, and other people followed suit. When Colin Kaepernick first decided to take a knee rather than stand for the national anthem, you would think he bombed a hospital, threw a concussion grenade into a crib, or shot your family's furry friends. His action sparked a conversation and ire from sea to shining sea, and at a perfect intersection with real sports, politicians wasted no time picking up their political footballs and playing the game that should all be the more familiar. At the federal level, no serious work has been done in ending the drug war, and which incarcerates people for nonviolent offenses, arms, and enriches gangs and cartels. All right, yeah, this is a longer article that I wrote that talks about the problem with these things and why these things don't get fixed. And in fact, they go to the heart of what I think Colin Kaepernick and others are actually protesting. I'm going to go back to the statement by Malcolm Jenkins and read it again. I will not let this decision silence me or stop me from fighting. The national conversation around race in America that NFL players forced over the past 2 years will persist as we continue to use our voices, our time, and our money to create a more fair and just criminal justice system. If you think our criminal justice system is fair, I think you need to do some rethinking. It is known. I mean, It is known. It is without a doubt that there are disparate, I don't like using that word, but there are disparate impacts for different sorts of people. And in fact, I think the drug war is the big driver of this. I think this is the root of what a lot of the issues with the criminal justice system, because the war on drugs allows for nonviolent criminal offenses. I think that the law should reflect a very simple maxim, that if there is no victim, there is no crime, and the victim can't be society. This is the best interpretations of legal theory. The best instances of justice are when they involve individual people. And I can think of no greater injustice than the fact that millions of people have been locked up and thrown in a cage for years and years and had their entire life ruined because they choose to ingest a certain plant or substance that someone else has deemed bad. If you want some more thoughts on this, you can go and check out, I think it's episode 12 of when I was doing the Subversive Liberty podcast, which is still on this feed, where I talk about drugs and society. And I really think that, and this is not, and I'm going to try and move us beyond politics in a second. I'm going to try and wade through the politics right now. But I really think that we need to that if you disagree with me, that we should end the drug war, you should try and take a step back and look at the situation from a broader context and wonder why certain drugs were maligned when others weren't, why certain drugs are legal when others aren't, and why we think that just by arresting someone that's going to change the fact, when we know that the illegal drug trade accounts for billions of dollars, when we know that no matter how hard you try, people will still find a way to smuggle it. The U.S. experiment has done this with alcohol. I mean, you can see it in the evidence of the Constitution that we outlawed we outlawed alcohol during the Prohibition era as a constitutional amendment. And you know what they did? They got rid of it. And you know what happened when that happened? You know what happened during Prohibition? The murder rate went up. You know what happened when Prohibition ended? The murder rate went down. And you can check these facts. And I don't see why it's so complicated for people to look and realize that this sort of issue is that the same thing happens with other drugs, right? With marijuana, with cocaine, with Molly, with ecstasy, and all these other types of party drugs. And I don't say this as someone who's particularly fond of most of those drugs. I don't say this as someone who has any interest in trying heroin or opium or cocaine or any of the party drugs. I don't have an interest in using these, but what I reject wholeheartedly is this idea that we should punish people for using them. The punishment should be when and if you become addicted and you can't hold down a job, and then you should figure out how to get help. And we should, and when I say we, I don't mean the government, I mean individuals should figure out ways to actually help these people rather than throw them, again, in a cage. This contributes to a lot of what I think is the racial divide, as people would put it, in the United States of America, because most of the what we would call, the inner cities, the west, south side of Chicago, a lot of the gang violence that occurs, which then brings people into a cycle of violence, so to speak, is driven by these trades that are moved to the black market. You can't stop it. You cannot stop the laws of economics. This is what's so frustrating, and this is really, if I'm listening to the NFL players correctly, and if I'm not, well, then maybe I'm on the wrong side of this. But if I'm listening to the players of the NFL correctly, this is what they want to fix. They want to figure out a way to have it so that kids aren't getting into gangs, right? This is a big thing. They want to make sure that kids aren't getting thrown in jail. They want to make sure kids aren't getting shot. And the way you solve that, in my opinion, is you start by ending nonviolent offenses. If you start by ending nonviolent offenses, you are going to make it a lot easier for the police to interact with people, because suddenly the police aren't going to be trained to escalate everything into some sort of drug stop. The police are going to be able to, investigate actual crimes that are occurring. And this is a common theme. And in fact, I think it should be, at this point, I feel like I should kneel for the national anthem. I'm just somebody that stands. I'm not really interested in big displays, and I'll stand up, I'll stand there, I'll take my hat off. It's not something I particularly care about, but goodness me, when this story broke, I actually thought, well, screw it. Maybe I will. Maybe that is the solution, is more people getting involved. But I really think if we talk through this, and if you're listening to this and you're somebody who disagrees with me and you want to write a letter, feel free to send it to Subversive Liberty. I will publish it and I will respond to it. But I don't understand. I don't understand why this is so much of what we choose to talk about. And I think this goes back to the point I was making earlier about symbolism and allowing symbols to become more than simple representations for ideas. And I think that's done purposefully to obfuscate from the bad things that our government does. If that article that I kind of read the point out where that I read out, and again I would encourage reading it because I think it's a very important point that I make within it. But that you would think just because someone kneeled for an anthem that they bombed a hospital, which the U.S. government drone war has done through a concussion grenade, which happened in I believe it was New Jersey. A SWAT team threw a concussion grenade for a nonviolent drug offense. And of course, the cops shoot like one dog every couple of hours or one dog a day, and they just kill people's pets when they're trying to, again, a lot of times serve warrants for non-violent offenses. These things shouldn't be crimes to begin with, and yet they are, and so the police go through. And this all contributes, by the way, what I would think to be what people call the epidemic of police brutality. This is what's at the root of it. If we really want to try and move beyond the political realm, if we want to try to move beyond the political conversation that surrounds it, which is what you're going to hear on every single major talk show for the next couple of weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if the Players Association proposed a strike. I wouldn't be surprised if the players, in fact, did strike to protest this policy. And here's an interesting situation. You now have me, someone who's not the biggest fan of unions, if I'm being honest, but I respect the fact that they can exist and that people can voluntarily come together to collectively bargain. I think you'll see a very interesting situation where I would actually support the actions of the union in protesting this policy and perhaps causing a lockout and not allowing people to play. It's a really interesting situation that we have ourselves in, and I'm not going to make this episode super long, so I wanted to remind some people, if you've never heard of this before, or just to talk about it, the famous Roman phrase, panem et circenses, or bread and circuses. This is this traces back to Satire 10 of the Roman satirical poet Juvenal, who lived around AD 100. It identifies, and it's meant to call to question the policy of the Roman government to give free bread out to people and to provide vast forms of entertainment. And this is where I think there's a problem in our society, is that we are focusing on this sort of issue. You're focusing on whether someone has the right to kneel for an anthem of a country that supposedly claims to be free, which should prima facie should then be obvious that they do. There is no, I don't see how there's any debate within that. If you accept the fact that the U.S. is a free country, if you accept the fact that there is a freedom of speech within the United States, and the fact that people can protest their government and government decisions, there should be no question in your mind that someone should be able to protest the national anthem, the representation, the song that represents America in the Olympics, in every single sporting event here in the United States, so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that the NFL can't create a policy around it that says that people shouldn't kneel for the national anthem. Again, I've already said that. I disagree with it. I think it's wrong. I don't think it's correct, but I do think it's within their rights, and it absolutely is as a private institution. Here's the interesting part about that, though, as I was working through this before I started the episode. It is a private institution, but a lot of the stadiums are built with public funds. So maybe there could be an answer here. And again, I don't like to talk politically, but let's go ahead and do it. Maybe there could be an answer where cities pass free speech zone laws that say that in these any government, any building that the government helped to fund, there can be no abridgment of the First Amendment. Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be an interesting turn of events if suddenly people can get on board? And by the way, to the people, if you are somebody who advocates for freedom of speech and you are not on the same page as me here, again, I think you're wrong. I would love to hear your arguments as to why you're not. And I will, in fact, engage with you, because I think it's important for the process to happen. It's important for us to go back and forth and figure out where, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not actually doing this right. Maybe I'm just off my rocker at this point, and I have no idea why I'm I'm completely in the wrong by saying that people should be able to take a knee. Again, taking a knee is not actually disrespectful. Lying down, maybe, might be, who knows. I still think that that is entirely within your rights as an American citizen, and in fact should be encouraged by all American institutions, and that would include the NFL. And what bothers me, I think, the most about this is the fact that it's become so politicized. And it is the fact that people have this religious fervor when it comes to their sports affiliations and what they think sports represent. I think it's entirely fine if you want to watch sports as a way to unwind. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, I just don't like the politics creeping into this." Okay. So let's start to fix the problems. Let's start to address the problems. But of course, I don't think a lot of people want to do that, again, because I think most politicians are more concerned with turning these issues into political footballs, which again, the point of political football is not to score. It is to keep passing the ball back and forth between the two teams so that nobody scores, but everyone is entertained and everybody is part of the process in that regard. I think that you need to take a step back if you're somebody that disagrees with this. I think that if you post and say that, oh, this is about damn time that the NFL has done this, I think you're missing the point. I think you're a phony. I think you're fake. I think your patriotism is a sham, frankly. Because if I might quote the words of Mark Twain, a patriot supports his country all of the time and his government when it deserves it. Mark Twain, by the way, was a man who stood in the Anti-Imperialist League that was against the kind of military adventurism that we engage in today. And really, that's what's at the root of this. Because this is always the way the conversation goes, right? If you kneel for the anthem, you're disrespecting the troops. You're disrespecting the ideals that they fight for. And okay, maybe they're fighting for those ideals, but what are they accomplishing by fighting? And if you're not willing to answer those types of questions, you shouldn't be part of the conversation. Take a step back. Go ahead and leave it. Stop thinking that your opinion is worth having. I didn't think I was going to get this upset about this, but it really does bother me. It really does bother me that at this point we are still talking about this. This is still an issue. This is going to drive the news media, I'm sure, for another couple of weeks. Finally they have something else with Stormy Daniels. And of course, and I say Stormy Daniels, and now I'm all of a sudden talking about Trump because he has been one of the, he's really been nasty about this issue, right? He said something to the effect of, wouldn't you just love it if someone said, get that son of a bitch off that field? I have no problems with people having religious devotions. I have no problems if that religious devotion includes your sports team. What I have a problem with it is you enforcing that on other people and you forcing people to bend to your will. And that's exactly what I think the NFL has done here. I think this is entirely a move that was for the ratings. I think this was entirely done to placate the average uninformed person within the United States who should listen to this and take a listen. Tell me what you think. I am really interested, by the way, if you do listen to this with people reaching out. I want the new show to be more about dialogue, especially when I do these solo episodes. I really would like it for people to respond to the claims that I'm making in any form. Again, you want to do it in writing, you want to make a 5-minute video. I promise if you create something that's good, I will respond to it. And yeah, that's and so I wanted to do one more thing, which is a little poem I wrote. This is a little poem I wrote, I don't know, a long time ago. And this happened when this whole thing began. And I think it kind of sums up my thoughts. I stand by it still. And I think it would be a good place to start to end this episode. So this is a poem about Kaepernick, whose name I couldn't spell. I do not care if Kaepernick stands. I do not want to list demands. But if you believe in red, white, and blue, this should not be too tough for you. Freedom reigns and chaos is quelled when we protect innocence from hell. Our justice system screws you over. Our military sends sons over. Because of both, you bury them in the ground. But please, go ahead. Tell me what to do now. Let's never learn from mistakes long past. Let's act like fools, drunk and crass. But if you're wanting to live free from unjust laws and tyranny, The government cannot lead to these. I humbly suggest we try liberty. And that is always my suggestion in all things. I think we should try and build a free society. And in a free society, we wouldn't have these onerous and disgusting laws on the books that put people in prison for something that shouldn't be a crime, and something that I would argue isn't a crime in a moral sense. So you only are causing a crime. You're only causing offense when you hurt another person. Not when you choose to take a drug. Not when you choose to, let's say, kneel. Not when you choose to, I don't know, do anything, man. Anything. Just don't harm people. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Why is that such a difficult issue for people to get behind? Why is it that even though I am agreeing with with Colin Kaepernick, that I have a feeling that he would disagree with me on a lot more? I don't know. And frankly, those are some of the things that I'm trying to figure out, and what I hope this project of Understood Properly will lead to. Which I think the next episode I do will probably either be the monk debates, or it will be an explanation of what I'm trying to do here with Understood Properly. And yeah, it's such a frustrating issue for me here, because I am wary of the power that sports have over people. And because it's tribalism, right? It puts you onto teams. It puts you into camps. It tells you who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and it exacerbates the maybe natural tendencies we have to split off into groups. And again, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy sports. That means you should prepare yourself. If you're somebody that's getting really emotional about this thing, it means you should maybe try and take a step back. Use your capacity to reason. Use your ability to think through things and really question whether you are on the right side of things. Because I think if you're more concerned with the fact that NFL players who get paid really well are kneeling instead of standing for the national anthem, and you're more concerned about that than the actual atrocities that occur, not only within our society here in the United States, but abroad, and the consequences of our foreign adventurism, which again, tying it back to the idea at the beginning, that's what a lot of the PR budget of the DoD has gone to, is doing these, is putting on these events and putting on these displays specifically so that you correlate this thing that you love with this country that you love, and that must be correlated with the military. And so therefore it must be the case that all of these, it must be the case that all of these that all of these things, these policies, these decisions, these wars we've gotten in, whether it's the war on drugs or the wars abroad, the war on terror, that all of these things are justified because might makes right, because the American government can't be wrong, because we're a bastion of freedom. How's that freedom looking today? How's that freedom looking when mandatory minimum laws send people to jail for 20 to 30 years for only committing a nonviolent offense? How is that freedom looking when, because you grew up in an area where you don't have a lot of opportunity, you join a gang and that gang puts you into a bad situation, and those gangs only have power because of the black market, because the government has made something illegal that people want access to? How is that freedom? How is that the type of society that we want to live in? It's not the type of society I want to live in, and I hope that people who hear this and agree with me will maybe start to think through these things more. And again, if you disagree with me, I highly encourage you to reach out, because I think this, even though I don't love talking about sports, this is such a big part of American culture that it is important, and I do think that there's something to say here, and I've said it at this point. So that will do it for me today, everybody. If you are interested, make sure that you like subversiveliberty.org on Facebook. You can go to subversiveliberty.org/subscribe to find me everywhere. If you are interested in writing for Subversive Liberty, please reach out to me. If you ever have any thoughts, just send them to me. Again, I'm looking to do a lot more interviews. I want to have conversations with people, and I want to try to move the conversation beyond politics. That doesn't mean we're not going to get tripped up on politics sometimes, as this episode has clearly shown. But this is a process that I am trying to develop, and hopefully it will be beneficial not only to myself, but to everyone else out there. And if you do like this show, please share it with a friend. Tell someone about it. You don't have to blast it on Facebook. Send it in a private message. Just mention, hey, I know my buddy, he does a show. You like freedom. Hey, check it out. Tell me what you think. And you can find me on all forms of social media at Brian Thornton Jr. That's THORNTON, Thornton, like a thorn in your side. And yeah, remember, if we fear what we do not understand, the answer must be to try to understand everything. So I hope you have a good morning, a good evening, and a good night.